This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Tamotu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations. This is a show about great trash, difficult art, and our complicated relationships with art and culture. My name's Hugh, I'm the host of the show, and I'd like to take this opportunity to put in a very mild content warning for the show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good, but sometimes there are aspects of the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Check the episode descriptions for more information, and do be aware of your listening environment. Kia ora, good evening, or in the immortal words of Fred Dag Esquire, g'day. This is another solo mini-sode of the show. I do want to keep these to a minimum, but I also want to have at least an episode a month go out, and if I don't do this one, there will be no episode for the month of February, and we cannot have that. I do have a couple of proper episodes cooking, they're just not quite ready yet, so look out for those. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy them when they get here. I think they're going to be pretty interesting. So, I have a thing I want to talk about, or a series of things that I want to talk about that I feel like will coalesce into a meaningful point. We will find that out together. In the meantime, though, or before I get to that, a little bit of news, I suppose. There is a new article. Now, we have kind of talked the Neil Gaiman situation to death here on Reserved Recommendations. And so I really don't want to give you any more of my reckons on him. However, there is an article that I want to draw your attention to, which addresses Neil Gaiman and which I do think is worth your while. And let me just briefly go into why that is. So, this is a blog post by a woman called Elizabeth Sandifer. Elizabeth Sandifer is a cultural critic, occultist, and blogger. She did a really long series called TARDIS Eruditorium, which is a deep episode-by-episode analysis of Doctor Who that treats it sort of as a cultural exegesis, like takes it apart in order to look at how it connects with where British culture is at the time of the episodes and how they hold up through a modern lens and a whole lot of stuff. Like, it is a long, very detailed and kind of fascinating series if you're into Doctor Who. She is also writing a series called The Last War in Albion, which is where this Neil Gaiman blog post comes in. So, The Last War in Albion requires a bit of explaining. I mentioned that Elizabeth Sandifer is an occultist. I would go further and say probably practicing magician in the Alan Moore literally doing some magic, at least for their own kind of psychic habitat kind of sense. And The Last War in Albion is an account of the British comics industry and its impact on the global comics industry. Because if you're not aware, the turn in the 90s into grim and gritty, and also like trying to have prestige first editions of absolutely everything, that was driven by the success of work coming out of British comics writers, really. Specifically, it was driven by the success of Alan Moore's Watchmen and V for Vendetta, I think. And the push for the kind of legitimization of the graphic novel as a format, also really driven by both Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman. So, massive global impact there in terms of the way that comics are done writ large. Elizabeth Sandifer's account frames this in quite concrete terms as a magical war between Alan Moore and Grant Morrison. Now, Grant Morrison you might not know about as much as Alan Moore if you are not kind of a deep comics head. Alan Moore has had 3 movie adaptations, all of which he famously loathes, but which represent like a massive break of his stuff into the mainstream. And I guess has more straightforwardly, in terms of his preferred style and tone, that connects with people like Neil Gaiman, who are better known than he is in a modern context. Grant Morrison is a wee bit more obscure, but did a similar trick to Alan Moore in terms of taking kind of neglected characters from the back catalogue of whoever he happened to be working with and giving them transformative runs. He did a particularly notable run on the comic Animal Man, where he injected his own animal liberation and vegetarianism, possibly veganism, politics into the strip as a connection with Animal Man's, animal-related powers, and eventually has Animal Man undergo a psychedelic experience where he literally meets Grant Morrison as the creator of the universe that he is living within, so that Grant Morrison could tell him that he's leaving the strip and an Animal Man will be passed on to another writer. All of which to say, you can see, even if you personally don't connect with the idea of people having magical wars or feel like magic is a thing that people can do, you can see how that is a way of framing both the work of Alan Moore and Grant Morrison. So the Neil Gaiman blog post is a chapter of this series, and it talks about Neil Gaiman's career in totality, which is a thing that I tried to do when I talked about Neil Gaiman for basically a whole episode in context with Warren Ellis. But Elizabeth Sandifer frames both Neil Gaiman's his slip into complacency, I suppose, in his writing, and his slip into more and more abusive habits in relationships as being part of, I guess, a magical blowback or cost for the power invoked in his career. And you can treat that as a metaphor or not. That's up to you. But Elizabeth Sandifer is a much better researcher than I am, and took a significant amount of words to really dig in, issue by issue into works like Sandman, and then investigate Gaiman's novels and so on and so forth. And so she's able to really chart out Gaiman's rise and then kind of slump into complacency, alongside the heightening allegations of first just kind of being a bit of a rake, I suppose, and then those rumors escalating into conversations about like actual sexual misconduct and abuse, in a way that I couldn't really, because I simply did not do that depth of research. So I appreciate it on that level, and I feel like the way in which she discussed his rise and then his creative complacency, partly as a cost of that rise, in a magical sense, really articulated what I was trying to get at when I was trying to discuss where I was at with his work, and similarly where I was at with Warren Ellis's work, because I mean, Elizabeth Sandifer doesn't go into Warren Ellis, but I had a similar experience with Warren Ellis, and in terms of enjoying his creative work, and I feel like, there's probably generalizable lessons across between the two artists in terms of I guess, how much effort was going into their creative output and for what reasons. So, if you have the patience for really long blog posts, you don't have to have read the rest of The Last War in Albion to understand the Neil Gaiman post. It's the most recent one, and it's called Cuddled Little Vice, I think. Something like that. But if you enjoy it, then by all means take that as an invitation to go back and check out more of The Last War in Albion. If you have the patience for it, and if you're able to get on its level per occultism and magic as a psychological and religious, spiritual, one of those words, type practice, then I think you'll find it's quite rewarding. So the actual thing that I wanted to talk about this evening is, I guess, I'm going to give it a title in the same way that I gave my little monologue against common sense a title. I feel like sometimes it's nice to be a little pretentious, I guess. I'm going to call this New Atheism and the Quest for a Better Death Cult. We'll get into what that means. It's a bit pretentious. Just bear with me. We'll leave New Atheism for a second. I'm partly just being snarky about that because I never really got on with it, and I feel like the way in which a lot of the New Atheist figures have straightforwardly translated themselves into reactionary ones has a lot to do with this particular mindset. But we'll leave that for now. First, I think what I need to do is define what I mean by a death cult. So what I'm talking about is the fictional construct where there are a group of people who are the minions of someone who is straightforwardly evil or who worship a being that is straightforwardly evil. And the problem with that is there's no reason to do that, right? Like, there is no reason to do what someone says if they're just straightforwardly evil and doing bad things and want bad things that will affect you negatively, and you straightforwardly understand that. There is no reason to worship a god who offers you nothing but pain. And I think while cultists are an attractive set of antagonists in fiction for kind of the same reasons that fascists are, you can have your heroes dispatch them without having to feel too much moral compunction about that. There is an issue if you want to think about how people actually behave and what draws them into having a particular faith or undergoing particular ritual actions. So I think there is a movie that illustrates this in a really interesting way. It is a very, very obscure indie horror movie from 2013, and it is called Jugface. So the conceit of Jugface is a young woman who is pregnant from an incestuous relationship that she's been carrying on with her brother, finds out that she is due to be sacrificed. So she lives in a backwoods, hyper-rural community in America where they worship a thing that lives in a pit. The way it's rendered in the movie is there is just a hole in the ground, and they sacrifice people by bleeding them into it. The way that they choose the sacrifices is that there is a potter who is seized by a sort of almost like possession-like trance state, and he will make a jug in the shape of the face of the person that the pit desires as its next sacrifice. The important thing about the pit in Jugface, though, is that firstly, it's genuinely relentless. If it's denied a sacrifice, then it will continue doing bad things until it gets what it wants. Secondly, if it is fed, it genuinely looks after the village and its inhabitants. The people in the village do not suffer from disease. They are healed from injuries so long as the pit is kept fed. Now, I don't want to go too much into the plot of the movie. You can go watch it if you want. I honestly have no idea where you could find it on streaming platforms because, as I say, it's a kind of obscure movie from over 10 years ago. However, I invite you to go do that. The point that I want to make is that in a world where the pit from Jugface exists, it makes sense to be a member of that particular death cult. To some degree, at least. Because the pit requires, I think, it's explained in the fiction, and it's so long since I watched the movie that I honestly can't remember. But I think it's a sacrifice every 6 months, maybe a sacrifice every year, and it requires the villagers to not follow any other god. But aside from that, it means that they get to live their lives free from disease and injury. And it only ever takes one person. It never demands, multiple sacrifices. There doesn't appear to be any inflation or occult extortion going on. So that makes a lot more sense to me in terms of a fictional evil-ish religion that people would genuinely participate in than, for example, the cult in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Like, we see the sacrifice happen. It is unclear what the purpose of that sacrifice is. And if you look at religions that historically practiced human sacrifice, or any kind of sacrifice, there is a really clear quid pro quo in terms of what they expect the gods to do for them. And you can argue about is it reasonable to believe in that quid pro quo or whatever you like. The point is that if you accept the underlying logic, it always makes sense to some degree to participate in that system because there is some kind of benefit for the believer. And I think that's really important to remember, right? The key thing that I want to get across is that people they're not rational actors in the purest sense because people don't have perfect information. That's why economics is in some ways kind of witchcrafty, right? But people generally do, to the best of their own abilities and based on their own understanding of the situation, try to act in their own best self-interest as best they can. The reason that I think this is important, and this is where the new atheists come in, is that there's a tendency that really came through with the way that the new atheists discussed Islam in particular, which I think translates through to the way that the right currently talks about Islam, because let's face it, a lot of the people who were new atheists when that was a thing that people called themselves kind of transitioned to being straightforwardly right-wing these days. The tendency was to discuss religion, particularly Islam, but Christianity got this treatment as well, as though it exercised some kind of mind control over its adherents, as though if you could find a thing written in a religious text, that meant that straightforwardly everyone believed that thing as written, and that there was no level of discernment involved in in the practice of the religion, or in integrating that practice into daily life. And I think, if you know any people who have any kind of spiritual practice, that's just straightforwardly untrue, right? Like, people's faith informs how they live their lives, but people have always found ways to balance their faith with the demands of the world that they live in. The whole point of monastic traditions is that not everybody can do them. Like, if you are called to a higher spiritual path, by higher I don't really necessarily mean more noble, I just mean more refined, in the sense of purified. All of these sound like I'm saying it's more virtuous. What I really mean is essentialized. Like, if you really want to pare your life down to absolutely nothing but spiritual practice, it is very hard to do that and live in the world. And that's why a monastic tradition exists. But part of a monastic tradition is almost always some sort of process of reciprocity with the rest of the world, because the monastic people recognize that not everybody can live the way that they do, and that they can't live the way that they do without the support of an external community. So, there's the traditions within some strains of Buddhism around monks needing to beg. Partly that's because they are supposed to have a certain kind of poverty, and partly that's because the practice of spiritual refinement, if you like, in the sense of paring away everything that is not the essence, doesn't leave time to take care of their material needs. You can't work a job and do nothing but meditate. Those things are incompatible. So why is all this important? Well, it's because if you think that the people who follow a religion that you don't believe is true are brainwashed by that religion entirely, it's really easy to firstly accuse them of supporting horrible things, because religions are old and complicated. Because they span so much time, they naturally span changes in moral outlook, and it is very easy to treat a religious text as a dogmatic account of the genuine truth of the universe, when in the case of the Bible, as an example, it might be a series of discussions about the universe, right? The Bible straightforwardly does not agree with itself. The only useful way to read it as a result is a series of competing accounts which aim at a truth somewhere in the middle of all of those things. Now, that's not necessarily exactly the same for other religious texts, because other religious texts have different kinds of authorship. That's just an example of how you might think of things. The point is that if you're dealing with a death cult in the Indiana Jones sense, if you're dealing with people who are unthinkingly and reflexively evil, then you don't need to wonder about why they're doing what they're doing. They're just doing it because they're evil. You don't need to have any compunction about taking hostile action against them, because, again, they're just doing it because they're evil. And you don't have to worry about whether their tradition contains anything of value, because, again, it's obviously just evil. And I think that is key to the way that the modern right frames basically everything it doesn't like. There is a strong tendency within the right-hand side of the culture war to look at everything that their opponents defend and consider it to be automatically insidious. That there is no possible chance that people on the left could be telling the truth about the things that they want or need or prefer, and that they must be seeking the things that they seek, like, for example, rights and recognition for trans people, for some sort of insidious purpose, which is what leads the kind of far edge of the right to spiral into conspiracism to such a great degree. Because, if people keep saying, no, this is what we really want, but you're constitutionally incapable of believing them, then, that means that you've got nowhere to go except for conspiracism. More importantly, because I feel like I'm probably not speaking to people who are on the right. I feel like they are unlikely to have a lot of patience with me. I feel like this has some implications for how some people on the left talk about the right as well. And it leads them to, I guess, pour a lot of energy into pretty unhelpful avenues. So we'll talk about that in a second. But first, we are around about at the halfway point. If this is going to come out to a full-length episode, we will find out together whether or not it does. So I'm going to take a brief break.
This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Te Motu, MPR.
Welcome back. You're listening to Reserved Recommendations on Manawatu People's Radio. Today, Irarangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. This is a solo mini-sode of the show, if you happen to be listening on the radio and you've just tuned in. And I called this one The Quest for a Better Death Cult, by which I mean looking into the motivations of people that we disagree with, I suppose, attempting to avoid the tendency to see people that we disagree with as a monolith who have only evil intentions, which will have nothing but negative impacts for both themselves and the wider world. Because it's my view that people don't really behave like that. And so I want to invite people on the left now, particularly, to look at the actions of people who are their political opponents and try to avoid thinking of them as a death cult. Specifically, I think there is a tendency, particularly among more kind of, I guess you'd say liberal, and I hate using the term, but boomer leftists, to kind of triumphantly declare that the right wing, who have been deluded into voting for whoever is their enemy of the moment. I mean, obviously at the moment it's Musk and Trump, but actually this is person agnostic. You saw a similar thing with George W. Bush back in the high and far off times when the world was new and all. But to trumpet that these people have made a massive error, that they have been either misled into doing something against their own best interests, or they've done something and they're about to be punished for their stupidity when the consequences of their actions come back to them. And I would invite people, I guess, to consider that there might be reasons for people to behave in the way that they do. When you're thinking about the evangelical Christian right, what you're thinking about is an organization that has its roots in the justification of slavery. That's where it comes from in an American context, is an approach to the Bible that derives from an attempt to find verses that justify slavery and then to present those as proofs of the justification of slavery and of the justification of American racial politics writ large, without recourse to any other part of the Bible that might seem to conflict with that. And as I said earlier, the Bible only makes sense if you consider it as a text that conflicts with itself and has to be harmonized by some sort of central hermeneutic. There's no way that it makes sense in any other sense because it's inconsistent. The battleground of race was fundamentally lost, and the strategy that the political wing of those churches adopted was to pick a new target with the idea of using that as a wedge to eventually drive back to race. So you can trace that pretty clearly in the history of the evangelical right in America. It progresses from race to communism to feminism to, like, specifically abortion as an issue, from abortion to gay rights, from gay rights to trans rights. And the explicit strategy there is that if they win any of those battles, they will push back to the previous thing. So when you look at evangelicalism in a New Zealand context, which we're currently dealing with in a big way with Brian Tamaki, you have to think about it in terms of something that fundamentally exists to mobilize anger against an enemy with the aim of using that as a wedge to be specifically regressive in terms of politics, to push things back and push things back and push things back. And that allies very clearly with their quite masculinist presentation, because quite simply, if you don't care about anybody except for men, life was better for men back when men had all of the power in society, right? That makes perfect sense. So that's what people who connect with the political wing of that kind of Christianity stand to gain. It makes pretty clear sense in terms of how they would benefit materially from that. Similarly, I think you can look at people who are atheist or at least irreligious in their opposition to quote-unquote wokeness, and you can find similarly there is a material appeal in that kind of politics for them. The other thing that I think it's important to consider is that you don't necessarily just have to have a material appeal, you can have an emotional appeal. A person that I would point to as a really good source of information about how the new right operates is a YouTuber called Ian Danskin. He's done a whole series of videos called the Alt-Right Playbook, which are all very short and easily digestible. They come out of a reaction to Gamergate, which is kind of old news now, but they are still pretty cogent in my opinion. And the point that he makes is that the rhetorical strategies of the right are not particularly aimed at discerning the truth in an adversarial way. Like, they're not interested in debate as a way of working out what's right. They're interested in debate as a way of demonstrating dominance, because dominance is a thing that they really value, and as a way of wasting people's time and energy. So I guess what I would call on my fellow left-wing people to do is to try and avoid spending too much time on calling out the hypocrisy of people like Trump and Elon Musk, or to avoid spending too much time worrying about whether what they say makes any sense. Because I would argue that neither of those are the appeal of what they're doing to the people that they appeal to. And I would also say that I don't think making any sense has any bearing on whether or not they will try to do them. You can see that with politics here in New Zealand. Very little of what the National Party is trying to do makes any sense. We are currently dealing here in Palmerston North with a number of roads likely being reclassified back to older, higher speed limits, where that makes no sense at all for their current conditions. It might have made sense when Palmerston North was a smaller town and those roads were more rural. Now it means we're going to have a really weird patchwork of speed limits going up and down in strange places. And that's because there's no practical reason to change the speed limits. The purpose of changing the speed limits is to emotionally satisfy some people who feel like the speed limits are too low for reasons that are to do with somebody else's feelings. And the only recourse against something like that is to just resist it to the best of your ability, right? There's no sense in trying to argue against it unless your goal is to have the argument against it be preserved in some form that people can go back and look at. But you can't argue against it online with random people. You're not going to change their minds. The important thing is the emotional appeal of, I want to be able to drive as fast as I want to drive. I think, and this is where I get into an issue of, this is not really my field, but intuitively, I feel like being right and having license to bully people because you're right are kind of a drug. And that is what the right is currently selling at the moment. They're not really selling anything practical. What they're selling is the emotional appeal to people who feel like the left-wing order was giving stuff to people who didn't deserve it, and was putting too much energy into people who weren't worth that energy. It gives those people the emotional appeal of seeing people who they consider to be not fully human, I suppose, be mistreated by the state, and it gives them the emotional satisfaction of feeling like they can hurt their opponent's feelings. That's what all of the talking about triggering comes down to fundamentally is, I get to hurt your feelings and you can't stop me. I don't know to what extent this is useful knowledge for you to have. I just feel like my life would be improved if I didn't see so many people with whom I fundamentally agree on a lot of things, putting so much energy into attempting to clown on people who fundamentally neither understand nor care about that clowning or that dunking. There are times when dunking on people on the internet can perhaps achieve something, but a lot of the time, all you're doing is playing to people who agree with you, and it's both tiresome and a waste of your energy. So practically, what can we do? Have I done anything helpful right now? I don't know. I hope so. Maybe. At least maybe I unpacked some thoughts that I've been having in a way that's useful to you a bit. I guess what I'm hopeful I have done is tried to give you the beginnings of a framework for how you might assess what someone's doing when you see them doing or saying awful things in public. Now, absolutely, the principle of like the functional asshole is in play right now. That's a thing I talked about on previous episodes, where if someone is actively physically trying to hurt you or people that you care about, then you take whatever action that you have to take in the moment in order to ensure people's safety to the best of your ability, right? Like I am absolutely not asking you to go and do Gandhi style, like I dare you to punch me pacifist resistance to a Destiny Church guy who's trying to smash his way into a library. I mean, if you want to do that, by all means, but that's not what I am specifically advocating for. I guess what I am advocating for is for you to look at people who are saying outrageous nonsense, either in the press or on the internet or in the media, or who are doing terrible things in the world, and just take a sec to assess why they might be doing that without assuming that they are simply irrational or evil. Because that will give you a framework to assess how you might respond to them, if you can. That will give you at least the ballpark of, are we talking about we need to work around these people? Are we talking about we need to resist these people through participating with our electoral systems? Here in New Zealand, every time the government wants to do a bit of lawmaking, they are required to put it through a process where the public get to make submissions on it. So you can go and submit on legislation that you think sucks, and you can say in detail why it sucks, and the people who are going to make the laws are obliged to read what you say. That's, that's not nothing. Or is this a situation where someone is trying to kick in your door and you need to take a more immediately active response? You need to assess that on a case-by-case basis. I would argue that none of those responses involve talking about how Trump smells like shit because he wears a diaper. I fundamentally don't think that either treating someone as an idiot or as a figure of pure evil is ever going to lead you to having a constructive way to deal with them and whatever it is that they might be doing. I will be back sometime in the next couple of weeks with a brand new episode. I do solemnly promise this. I am taking all practicable steps to get it done. In the meantime, I hope that you have enjoyed the music that you've been listening to in the background of this. As with all of my recent minisodes, this comes from the project that I've been doing, which I am probably within a week or so of releasing, depending on how much time I am able to spend pushing buttons and moving sliders in the next few days. So look forward for that. I will post about it on all of my various social medias when it is up. If you have enjoyed this, then maybe check it out. And in the meantime, look after yourselves, eh? You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show was produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. If you enjoyed this show, why not go ahead and share it with a friend? You can find the last 10 episodes of this show at npr.nz/show/reserved on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts. If you want an episode older than that, try searching for Reserved Recommendations on YouTube. You can find me at Objective Reality on Blue Sky, or send emails to objectivereality@gmail.com. You can also follow Reserved Recommendations on Facebook or Instagram. And finally, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit community access station. If you like this or any other piece of their fine audio programming, why not fling them $1 or $2? You can go to npr.nz/donate for more information on how to do that.